Hello, my name is Ken Little, and I host a 24/7 live streaming bird feeder located in Hoover, Alabama, which is a city in the metropolitan area of Birmingham, Alabama. As you can see behind me is an example of a live stream that I have. It's kind of one that I'm using for this little video. My channel is a learning one. And one where we not only try to enjoy the birds, but we also try to learn about the birds. So you can learn to attract and enjoy the birds, where you're located and in your backyard, maybe set up a feeder or whatever. While I have produced a Feeder Talk series on my channel composed of 13 videos, I kind of stopped developing those as I wasn't really sure if there was additional demand for those type videos. Plus, I was kind of running out of content because it was just me oriented. I didn't know what really you as the viewer wanted to know, what questions you might have. And typically I also provide a brief live discussion when I maintenance the feeder every day. However, one of my wise moderators from the live stream suggested that I request questions from viewers and then produce a monthly Q&A video. So this is a second monthly installment of what I hope to be an ongoing series, and I just want to let you know how much I do appreciate your questions. And thanks for the interest in this ongoing series and my channel. Now, the intro's out of the way. Let's get started with the questions. All right, the first question is, how long do you leave up a hummingbird feeder? The person says, when I lived up north, I took them down the middle of September, and they're not sure about North Carolina, which is where this person recently moved to. They were in Pittsburgh and then moved to North Carolina. The question is, it depends on where you live. Audubon recommends at least 2 or maybe 3 weeks after you see the last hummingbird. And what this does is not that you're trying to get that bird back, but you're ensuring that the birds migrating from north of your location have a refueling stop. While hummingbirds may have migrated, stragglers from the north of you may need your help in refueling for their long journey. The second question, I have problems with grackles and starlings dominating my feeders. Is there any way to prevent them from taking over my feeder? Okay, the answer, there are strategies that can be employed to discourage them while allowing other birds to feed. Amongst these strategies is feeder selection and use, food selection, and a plan. Among the strategies are some of the following. A is to minimize the areas where larger birds can land and feed. The starlings and the grackles are typically larger birds. So in other words, you may have to pull your platform feeder and replace it with a tube feeder, which is more difficult for them to land on. Now, when considering tube feeders, employ smaller ones with, not smaller feeders, but actually feeders, the round feeders with smaller pegs or removable pegs that the birds can land on and feed. And that way, smaller or no pegs will make it harder for the larger birds to feed. So that keeps them from having a landing spot to where they can actively feed. And since the ground is a large area which for these birds to feed, remove any ground feeding trays and reduce the amount of seed that's falling to the ground from the feeders above, if you can do that. There are seed catcher trays and lightweight fabric attachments that can be employed to catch the seeds under the tube feeder. But if you have a hard catcher tray like I have in my Droll Yankee clear tube feeder, larger birds can also land on those and feed, because I have doves do it all the time. That is kind of a balancing act for them, but this means that the grackles or the starlings can feed on those. Also frequently clean up spilled seed on the ground underneath the feeders. C, let's consider a tube feeder that has adjustable weight activated perches that deny access to the food when a bird or a squirrel above the weight limit tries to access the food. Now, you've seen these with, like squirrel type feeders that discourage squirrels, but some of these feeders actually have an adjustable weight, and you really need to examine the package carefully to make sure that it's adjustable also with the weight of birds. So you can adjust it to larger, weight from larger birds can also trigger it to where it closes out access and denies access when the weight limit is hit. It denies access to the feed, and that is another way of doing it. Also consider tube or suet feeders with cages that allow small birds to access the feed but not larger birds. So you've seen that some of them are suet in there in a cage that surrounds it, and it has openings that smaller birds can get in but larger birds can't. Also some suet feeders also offer access to the suet on the bottom of the feeder, which is difficult if not impossible for like larger birds, maybe except woodpeckers, to access a suet. Another strategy is to reduce the amount of seeds that birds throw out by offering black oil sunflower seeds or whole sunflower seeds. Also try safflower seed. Let's see. It's really not safflower is not really a preferred seed of grackles. If you feel bad about not feeding some of the larger birds, like, hey, if I'm just got these cage feeders, where are my pretty larger birds, my cardinals and all that going to feed? You can always set up a feeder a distance away from your preferred feeder that the larger birds can feed from, and that might be hit, by the grackles and the starlings, but that's kind of the risk you take. All right, that's starlings and grackles. The next question's from Kathy Birdwatcher of North Dakota. The winters in Alabama are not as harsh as they are here in North Dakota, but are there any strategies I can implement for this upcoming winter? Okay, well, I'm sure there's someone out there that's more qualified to answer this question than me, who's in the deep south. But that's someone who actually feeds birds in the winter in a more frigid environment. But I'll just, try to answer this question the best I can. If I lived in colder climates, first I'd assess the birds that remain in my area and feed at my feeder during the winter. Don't try to aim your food at birds that have already flown the coop, flown south. I would also tailor my feedings toward those birds only, and also use of feeders that are more sheltered and protected will help keep the food more edible. In other words, so aim the feed for the birds you're targeting, and use feeders that shelter or protect the food to keep it edible, because if it snows and then rains, it turns to ice. If you had a little roof over it, that would be helpful. Platform feeding trays need to be covered to keep snow and ice off the food. Tube feeders that are more enclosed, not the mesh type tube feeders, but those that are enclosed will fare better in more harsh conditions and will protect the food. Kind of like the Droll Yankee clear feeder that I have in my 24/7 stream versus the wire mesh. The clear feeder somewhat protects it from the food from the elements, whereas the wire mesh gets wet and could actually get wet and freeze if it was up there. Hopper feeders with clear windows also protect the food and make it available to the birds. So there are hopper feeders with a roof over it, and the bird hops through there, but most times those hopper feeders come with plexiglass windows that slide in, and so those you can employ those the hopper feeder with the windows, and it distributes the seed at the bottom of the window on both sides. Again, aim your feeding strategy at the birds most likely to visit, and not try to attract all birds, because you'll be putting feed out there that and you having to pay for these feeders, these kind of different type feeders. But if you live up there all the time, you'll probably already have some of these. But additionally, birds need to stay hydrated. I'd purchase a heated water basin or a heater insert for bird baths or water bowls, and this assures that the birds have water when all other sources might be frozen. So you need to consider their water needs as well, so they can stay hydrated. That's because they won't be able to find it. I mean, I guess you could say they could eat snow, but I don't know that much about it. Like I said, I'm from the deep south. Next question from Bob P. of Missouri. Hey Ken, I'm new to bird feeding and have overbought the amount of feed required. Will the feed keep until next spring? Personally, I try to gauge supply and demand and buy accordingly to, try to log and gauge, the volumes. But, and sometimes when there's flocks of birds coming through, you might overbuy in anticipation of that. Like if starlings hit you pretty hard and grackles come flying through that certain time of year, you might bulk up. And there's certain times, of course, when a retailer has a sale and it is a value to buy in bulk. But however, buying in bulk is really not a great strategy unless you first invested in good in the right containers and that you store the seeds shortly after purchase. And because seed can last 3 to 6 months, especially if stored in a kind of sealed container in a dry garage or basement. And also seeds with shells fare even better. For instance, thistle or Niger, I think they're one and the same. Niger seed have a short shelf life and generally should be only bought in small quantities and not stored. So there are certain seeds that have shorter shelf lives, and Niger and thistle is one of them. Over time, seeds tend to lose their nutrients through oxidation. If eaten by the birds, the ones that have lost their nutrients and that means that it provides less nutrition and is more like eating filler, but that's not necessarily harmful to birds. However, if improperly stored, seed might absorb moisture and could contain bacteria and mold that would be harmful to birds. So again, if you're going to store the seed and you buy it in bulk, make sure you have a sealable container and keep it in a fairly temperature controlled environment. You don't want an environment too hot or I don't guess too cold makes a difference, but too hot actually does. It breaks things down more. And one test to see if stored seed is reasonably fresh is to crack open one of the seeds and the hull and if it's got a hard shell like a sunflower, take the heart out the seed and squeeze on it. And if the seed's still good, you should be able to get some oil out of it. So that's a test when you pull that seed out to see if you want to feed it to them. Again, if it's been properly stored, I think you're probably okay serving it up. Okay, the next question is from Patricia Willis, Washington State. Enjoy your site, Ken. I noticed you use dried mealworms. Have you ever used live mealworms? And is there any major difference between them? My answer really would be, frankly, while live mealworms are probably preferred by the birds, they're higher maintenance. They are a higher maintenance feed type, and I just don't want to have to deal with that. Throwing food in there and feeding them and then putting them in the refrigerator and this and that. I get plenty of birds using the dried variety, and I buy it in 11-pound increments and store it in sealed containers in my temperature controlled basement. And I say temperature control, it's a garage basically, basement, but it's not subject to extremes. It's still kind of ambient heated or cooled by the house, and it doesn't have a whole lot of moisture in it. It's not air conditioned, but it is a pretty good environment. Do mealworms perform better at attracting birds? I don't know, but I would think they'd find them more like the food that they get naturally and maybe have more nutrients. And some sources suggest that using the live ones in the spring or times when the birds are feeding their young, adding that live mealworms contain moisture and that the dried mealworms don't, which is better for the young birds in the nest, because if you think about it, the young birds aren't able to fly out and go get water, so the parents will concentrate more on giving them live protein sources that does contain moisture. So by having live mealworms, you actually have that moisture factor included in the what you are feeding the birds. So I've never tried that. I just have stuck with dried mealworms because I still get plenty of birds, and I have seen that the birds, when they have babies, they load up. They come and they grab a lot of that, and I don't know how they get the moisture to the birds, and I should research that. Kind of embarrassed I don't know that, to the birds in the nest. But I think it's because they're supplementing what I'm feeding at the feeder with real insects, and so we also got to think that our feeder's not the end all end all bird food for these birds that's keeping them alive. The birds, it's really a complement to what's around, and if you plant native in your yard and you make an environment around for the birds that have other elements there, then you'll maintain a lot more birds in your yard. So have probably more action at your feeder because you'll attract more and maintain more birds in your yard. So just keep in mind your feeder is not the all in all end all feeding source. However, in the wintertime, when the sources dry up, even that in your yard, then it does become very critical for the birds. All right, next question from Pam Riley. How long should we allow suet to sit in a feeder before it goes bad? All right, first let's define suet. Some people know what it is, some don't. The definition, according to Cornell Lab of Ornithology, is suet is technically defined as hard fat around the kidneys and the loins in beef and mutton. But in common usage, most kinds of beef fat are also called suet and can safely be fed to birds. I had to read that from notes. Animal fat is easily digested and metabolized by many birds. It's high energy food, especially valuable in cold weather. So, in response to your question, it depends on several factors. First is the type of suet, and second is the environment that the suet is in. Regarding the type of suet, if it's raw suet, it has a shorter life than the suet that's made from rendered fat. The second factor is environment. So in hot climates, the rate suet can go bad. It can go bad quicker, and the rendered suet can melt in the heat unless you buy the no-melt variety. Additionally, moist environments can shorten the life of suet. So raw suet, though, is like pure fat and not so much affected by moisture as much as suet that's mixed with other ingredients really that contain with which moisture really can develop mold. As one can see, there's not really a black and white decision, but falls more in the gray territory. Is you have to consider both factors mentioned above. The type of suet and the environment it's in. In my case, I'm not really serving up raw suet. Never have, and I don't really plan to, but rather store-bought rendered with a mix of other ingredients. As such, I visually inspect the suet when at the feeder for clues of its deterioration. If it's around a lot of moisture, rain lately, or just plain humid, like it can get it sometimes in the summers here in the deep south of the U.S., I'm looking for mold. Also, if any bugs are in the mix or there's a smell, then I think it's time to change it. Generally, in the winter or areas of cold temps, the suet typically also lasts longer. In fact, some folks don't put out suet until the temperatures are colder. And in hotter climates, the suet can melt or spoil much faster. So I hope, Pam, that answers your question. Question from Amy Kelly. I'm curious about Ken's water strategy. It's gone from a pedestal bird bath to a heated one on the ground, and the bronze one hanging is gone. Perhaps make room for something else. Actually, the bronze one I was just refilling probably when you happened to tune in. I'd take that out. Every time I put more water in there in the water sources containers, I try to clean it. So to try to not let bacteria and such, and algae and stuff to fester and grow in the water source. With that copper water bowl, I'll take it out and then I'll dump the old water out. I'll get a hard bristle brush and I'll run it around there a couple of times, make sure I'm getting out all the elements off of it. I'll put a little water in it, scrub it again, then I'll pour that out, and then I'll refill it with some fresh water, and then put the copper water bowl. Now, the groundwater basin is a little different in that we got raccoons and critters that go stand in there after they've been walking around the feeding area, and so I find mulch and leaves and pieces of food in there. So every day I go out there and with water. It's usually my second trip. First trip's to refill the food, and the second trip is water trip. Is to go out there with my water brush and my flexible bucket full of water, and I'll empty the water from that tray, pour a little water in, just like with a copper bowl. I'll brush that out. I pour some water in and brush it again, then dump that out, and then put some fresh water in it. So, I'm trying to provide clean water for the birds so they have adequate hydration. Okay, I think in answering Amy's question, I think hydration is an essential element in feeding and attracting birds, especially if the local water source is a distance away. I also believe that some kind of cascading water feature that creates a moving water sound is also an attractant for birds, helps them find the water and consequently find your feeders. I actually have 5 sources of water at my feeding station currently. There's a copper water bowl that we mentioned that's hanging in the upper feeder. There's a groundwater basin that actually has a power cord stored underneath it and has a thermostat controlled heater so water doesn't freeze. And this is currently my only source that's heated that I plug in for use when we start getting freezing temperatures. There are 3 other water sources, and they're ones that have a cascading water feature, which in freezing temps will have to be emptied and unplugged. The cascading bird bath will be removed, and I had an original bird bath that was not cascading. There was really only a solar little sprayer, solar activated sprayer that is in that. And what I'll do is I'll remove the current one that's cascading with the electrified motor in it that pumps the water out, because that won't be very effective in freezing temperatures. Even if it freezes on every other day or once a week or whatever, I still need to remove that. And then I'll replace it with the old-fashioned bird bath. And this bird bath is really kind of made of a composite material, so freezing and thawing doesn't really affect it like it might other bird baths, that when you fill it, the water expands. Like even a concrete one can crack and break based on the contraction and expansion of the water when it's freezing and thawing. I will buy a heating element for that bird bath that doesn't have a cascading feature or a pump, so that I'll have 2 sources of water, because the copper bowl will freeze, and I'll probably just leave that up there. It freezes and thaws during the time period, because we don't stay freezing for days and days on end. But I will buy a heating element for that traditional bird bath, and that way we'll have unfrozen water available from the birds from 2 sources. All right, question number 8 from John Davis in Tennessee. Are there any tips arising due to having a feeding station in close proximity of neighbors who may complain about birds potentially leaving deposits on their freshly washed automobile, or critters allegedly causing damage to their garden? That's a tough question. That's somewhat of a tough question, as the issue balances on desires and being neighborly. the desire for you is to attract birds weighed against your desire to be nice to your neighbor. It also depends on how well you like your neighbors. Seriously, one good faith gesture, and if you have room in your yard to do this, is try to move the feeders as far away from your neighbor's property line as possible. In fact, you could put it on the opposite side of the house from the neighbor who's complaining's house. Same with critters, but the critters might be a larger problem as there might be more apparent destruction. When people spend a lot of time in the garden and take pride in the garden, they do all they can to keep the critters out and from destroying the garden. So, you're getting a little bit closer to destruction of property there if you're, but it's a real controversial issue because I had cats that were predating the animals in my backyard, but there is no leash law for cats. Well, there is no leash law for wild animals either, and I asked the neighbor to put a bell on the collar on the cat, so at least the flying squirrel or whatever was trying to be predated by the cat at least had a little heads up on it. So because the cat took or predated a couple of flying squirrels of ours at the feeders right in front of our cameras. So critters can be a problem, but you need to check your local city and state ordinances. As some states, local authorities or homeowners association covenants might not allow you to put food out exclusively for wild critters. In my case, my defense is I'm putting food out to feed the birds, and I can't help it if critters that are in the area anyway come and eat there as well. Another option is to pull the ground feeding trays at night to discourage the critters from visiting. So if the critters still destroy the neighbor's garden, you've done what you can to discourage critters from visiting, as raccoons and opossums are typically nocturnal feeders. So I hope that answers that really unique question. That's kind of a sensitive topic, but I have experienced it with a cat predating some of the smaller critters at my feeder. So I had to, it's really kind of a touchy subject, but I hope that that answers your question, Mr. Davis, and I really appreciate everybody's questions, and I appreciate the support for the channel. We really appreciate you guys participating in the chat. We love your questions. Please thank your moderators. They do their best to keep it positive, clean, and informative. We've got 3 schools that I know of that watch the channel, so they're in it to not only enjoy the birds but also to learn. I have 5 bird ID videos when you're in the live stream. They're in the page description below the stream. And I also have a PDF file that I've worked hard to try to put all the birds and critters on, put a picture of the bird or critter and its name, and a hyperlink to details. So while that doesn't work if you print it out, go into the details, it does work if you have it open as a document, a PDF document. You can hover over it and you'll see the hand change, and you can click on it and it'll whisk you away to the details about that particular bird or critter. So please avail yourself of those resources that I provided. I try to make it as user-friendly and a learning environment as I can. And again, I do appreciate your support. We do take donations. I'm retired, and it's cost $250 to $300 a month for the feed and that for me to feed that. But if I don't get any donations, I enjoy it anyway, and I enjoy passing on what I've learned. In fact, the mantra of my channel is explore, observe, learn, and share. So that's what I try to do, and we'll learn together as well. I learned some tricks from a lot of the viewers, who've been feeding birds for 20 to 30 years, and they're in different environments. So we're all here to learn and have a good time and enjoy talking about something we all have an interest in. And again, I sure appreciate you taking the time to view the full content of this video, and you have a great day and God bless you.